Hi, everybody. My name is Marie Jacobs, and I'm a realtor. I've been in this business for about 18 years now, and I am here because I want to share with you, we want to share with you some information that I wish I had known in my 20s and 30s when I was starting out. And I didn't know anything about real estate or real estate investing or building wealth. And I wish that I had known this. So it's a passion of mine to be able to pass this on to people who are just starting out and don't know what to do and don't have the information or think they can't. And so today we're going to give you about 25 minutes of information. And if you want to move forward, we'll give you our contact information at the end so that you can reach out. And with me here is Brady Mullen, who is a financial genius. So I'm so happy to introduce him and let him tell you a little bit about himself.
Thanks, Marie. So I was a financial advisor for 18 years. And to make a long story short, I was trying to add real estate advice to the advice that I was giving my clients. And that just did not jive with the compliance department in that industry. And I worked with them for a couple of years to try to make that work. And I eventually threw up my hands and sold my practice to some friends of mine because I knew they would take good care of the clients because I wanted to work in this industry. And the reason that I do that is because I recognize that the decisions that people make about the real estate in their lives, whether they're renting it or owning it or investing in it, are some of the most crucial decisions that they can possibly make financially because real estate is so valuable. It's the biggest single asset most people will ever own. And so I focused my background in accounting and finance on helping people understand the impact of these decisions in their lives. And I felt like I was doing more to help people on their financial journey at that aspect, because that was such a crucial point in their life where they would make one decision versus the other that would end up having effects. And I know this might sound wild, but as we get into this, you'll see, I mean, I know you know, but the viewers will see that it literally is worth millions of dollars over your lifetime. Just simple decisions that really don't even change your lifestyle that much for in the beginning, or they don't really feel that different. But down the road, it has an impact that's worth millions of dollars, and it's crucial.
And I can say that after starting this late and only having done this for 10 years, it has already been hugely impactful for me. So we want to pass the word on.
Just has that impact. So let's get started. We'll jump into some content here. And I think the first thing that people need to realize or understand, at least have a basic understanding, is inflation. If you go back to 1988, now that seems like a long time ago. Some people watching this maybe weren't even born then. But if you go back to 1988, rents in the Denver metro area, it was very normal if you could find an $850, $900 a month rent for a house that looks something like this. That probably costs about $3,000 a month to rent now. Now I'm using a 3.5% rent increase over that period of time. It isn't normally that smooth. This isn't a historical because it would be a little bit bouncier. Sometimes it goes faster or slower than that. But on average, rents going up 3.5% is kind of on the conservative side. But that's what happened with rent over time. So the next
thing, and if I can add something there, Brady, I just checked in January the projections for rents this year because I am also a landlord, and the projections are 5 to 6% rents increase this year. So you are being very conservative on this.
Yeah, and a lot of the calculations that we'll see here, I'm stacking the deck in favor of renting so I don't want to be accused of cherry picking some example that makes homeownership look better than renting in this one scenario. It is literally better in just about all conceivable scenarios to own the roof over your head instead of renting it. Because if we look into the future, if we just project 3.5%, which again, as we just discussed, is probably conservative, but if we just project 3.5% into the future for the next 35 years, the $2,913 a month rent is now $9,381 in the year 2058. And that might seem like forever from now, but it'll come. I mean, for people in their 20s and 30s or even 40s, we'll probably be around 35 years from now. And for rent,
yeah, and you know, I was around in 1988, and I was paying those kind of rents, and I never could conceive of paying $3,000 a month. And here we are. And so looking at 9,000 in the future seems inconceivable to any of us, but we will be there.
Yeah, just as difficult as this is to comprehend, that's how difficult it was in 1988 for people who were renting to conceive that someday rent would be $3,000 a month. And here we are, and it feels normal to us because that's just what we're used to. And this will be the future if it continues at 3.5%. What's kind of scary is if it continues at 4.5%, and this is just a testament to the fact that small differences in rate over a long period of time have massive differences in the numbers. So if this goes up by 4.5% instead of 3.5%, we're looking at $13,600 a month in rent instead of $93.81. And if it goes up less than we expect, we're still looking at $8,000 a month instead of $9,000. So, I mean, rents have just increased consistently in the history of this country since the beginning of time, since the time that it was recorded. So we have to expect that it's going to be going up. Exactly what it will go up, we don't know, but 3.5% is probably on the conservative side, but we just have to prepare for that. And the reason that we bring that up is if you look at so here's that same graph, the cost of renting over time, but if you lay over top of that, the cost of ownership, and I'm using a $500,000 home that you put 5% down for. So it's a little more expensive on the monthly cost. It costs a little more to own than to rent, which is usually the case if you're only putting 5% down anyway. But this is what I call the delayed gratification. You spend a little bit more for a short period of time, and then pretty soon you're spending less. That's the green mark here. You're spending less to own your home than to rent it. And you'll still see that it creeps up a little bit over time, because even though your mortgage is a flat curve, or a flat curve, that's a contradiction in terms. Your mortgage is a flat expense that disappears after 30 years. But there are some expenses to home ownership, like maintenance, taxes, insurance. Those do creep up over time, but it's a very small percentage relative to the overall cost. So you'll still see that the cost of ownership does creep up a little bit, but the vast majority of those expenses is the mortgage, and that is a flat line, which keeps this overall line significantly more flat. So in the first year, you might spend a little more to own than to rent, but pretty quick, you're spending less to own than to rent. And if you think about this, so I'm going to turn the time over to you for a second, because I want you to tell your story about what you did with the first home. But if you decide to move out of this home and keep it as a rental, this difference here is your net income. So you could think of this as two tracks that you could be on as an individual. You could rent and have that continue to go up forever, or you could own and be on a much flatter curve, or you could be a landlord where, this red line is what you're collecting, and the green line is your expenses, and everything in between is how much money you're making every month. And at the 31st year, when that mortgage gets paid off, you're talking about a massive increase, a massive either savings if you're owning instead of renting, or if you're an investor, that's your net income. Like, real estate is a very consistent and profitable thing to invest in. And you've got some experience with that, which I'll let you chat about because you'll have better details.
Right. So 10 years ago, we bought a house, and we spent a little more than we could afford at the time. Rates were good. And so we lived in that house for 8 years. And a couple years ago, we decided to rent it. We had a lot of equity built. We didn't pay off anything extra on our mortgage. We had just had it for 10 years. The inflation numbers were there. Rent numbers were going up and up and up. And we were paying $1,600 a month for our full mortgage and interest and taxes and everything, insurance. And so $1,600 a month was a lot for us at that time. But then we turned to rent it, and we took the equity out of it. We had a lot of equity in it. So we took enough out to put a down payment on a new house, and we rented it. And so now you saw those rent numbers. We're getting $2,900 a month rent for it, and our expenses on it are $1,600 a month. So all of that cash flow, plus the equity we took out, the equity gave us the down payment to buy a new house, and we're cash flowing, whatever it is, $1,600, $1,400 a month. We're cash flowing, and that's going toward paying off the equity that we took out. We took a line of credit on the house, and we're paying that back. Plus, we're putting the rest of the cash flow down on our new mortgage, which was a little higher than we wanted to pay, but we had that extra cash flow. So now our current mortgage is still $1,600 a month that we're paying out of pocket. So the investment and the cash flow that you build over time really helps you to then build extra wealth. Now I have somebody paying off my mortgage, which has 20 years left on it. They're paying that, and they're paying part of the mortgage on my current house.
And I like that story too, because it illustrates also sometimes people are living in a cool little downtown apartment or something and they really like it. And in order to buy what they can afford, they've got to move to a place that isn't as hip and cool, and they feel like it's a downshift in their lifestyle. But what you did with the equity in your first home is you used it to springboard into the dream home that you now live in. And now you have both homes. One's an investment building you a lot of equity with an extra cash flow, helping you pay for that home and the home you live in, which is your dream home. And you did that all, and you did that by buying the house that you could afford first.
And it
So
really
let's-
emphasizes that that first statement that we made, I wish I had done this earlier because I could retire now. I don't want to retire. I love my job. I love my work. But if I had done this in my 30s rather than much later in my 50s, then it would have been a whole different story. And I'd have 5 rentals that would be paying off with somebody else's money. And then when those are all paid off, you showed that first slide that said, when it's paid off in 30 years, there's $6,600 in income on that house. Then I can retire. I've got that. And if I have a couple of those, I've got a huge income. I can travel. I can go anywhere I want.
Exactly. So I want to show, so that's that graph we were looking at. This is looking into the future when rents are going to be higher, but that's your cash flow. There's still some expenses to ownership because there's always tax, insurance, that's not going to go away, and some upgrades and things like that, or not upgrades, but upkeep rather. And there's some expenses, but it's significantly smaller than the rent that you collect in the future. And this graph only illustrates the cash flow. We haven't even talked, we mentioned equity when you were talking about your scenario, but this is just the cash flow. When you throw on top of that the equity, check this out. Here, I'll talk about those two in a second. That's the equity that you're earning along the way while your cash flow is doing these things. So these are the numbers that I pulled from the previous graph about it costs a little more for the first few years, but eventually it costs less to own a home and you're building all this equity. So in your case, by the time if you owned a home for 10 years, I'm only showing 4.5% appreciation, which is also conservative. Not only are you saving a few $100s every month, but you've got $373,000 of equity in your back pocket that is worth something. I hear some people say sometimes, yeah, but equity is not money that you can spend. And I just call bull on that, because you can definitely spend equity in your home, just like you can spend equity that you have in a stock portfolio. Yeah, you have to sell it before you get to spend it. But you have it. If you needed it and you needed to sell a property, you could do that and you'd have $370,000 in your back pocket. That definitely is wealth that can be spent.
And you can do exactly what I did. I took a line of credit against that house so that I could spend that equity on the down payment on my new house.
Yeah, and in this scenario, so this is again looking into the future, a $500,000 asset being worth, I know it's hard to believe, but $2 million someday. But if it appreciates at 4.5%, which is historically conservative, that's the math. What I think is really interesting about this is not only do you have $2 million of equity sometime in the future in this property, give or take, right? I don't know what appreciation is going to be. I'm just projecting what a 4.5% would be. But what I find interesting about that is you actually spend less money to put yourself in this position than had you rented. Because this previous slide here that shows renting, the area under these curves is the total amount of money that you've spent over time. And the area under this red curve is significantly larger than the area under this green curve. So you actually spend less money to own a home over time than you do to rent, and you have the equity. It's crazy. And then I'll show this couple.
Crazy not to do it.
Yeah, it is. And then the reason I show this picture is a lot of times I think of people. So I have adult children also, and and I was the same way at that age in my 20s, where I was whimsical. I wanted to travel the world. I lived in Eastern Europe for a few years. It was great, really exciting, really great part of my life that I love, and I wouldn't trade for anything. But I always think of whatever lifestyle you want to live, in what world is that lifestyle more difficult to attain because you have more money or because you're spending less money, right? If you're saving money on where you're living, or you have equity to draw from or to fall back on, does that make you more able to go and live the lifestyle? I just imagine these two are backpacking through Europe somewhere. It's just a picture off the internet. But are you more able to do this because you're spending less on where you live and you have some equity, or does that situation make this harder? right? Living the lifestyle you want is always easier when you have funds to do it. Like wealth matters.
Right. And I wanted to do all that too. In my 30s, I was traveling, I was going all over the world. It was really great. I had lots of money and disposable income. But the thing that we have the ability to do so easily is short-term rental. If you own a property and then you want to take 6 months off and travel Europe or backpack or do whatever, we have short-term rentals, we have VRBO. There's all kinds of ways to cover those expenses and continue to build your wealth and your equity on that property by renting it out. Let somebody else live there for
Yeah.
6 months and pay your bills.
And you know what's funny? So my wife is from Spain, and she has, that's where her family lives, and that's where she spent her time until about 6 years ago. And her friends in Europe, they all want to come to the States and short-term rent and travel the States like we do in Europe. It's as exciting for them to do that here as it is for us to do that there. They dream about that sort of thing. So there's a demand for that. If you want to take a month off and go visit Europe, there's people in Europe that want to do the same thing here and that will give you money for that house. So that difference between what you're spending and what you could earn, that's money that could be going in your pocket to help fund that trip. It's pretty
Right.
straightforward.
House
really.
sharing, it's very common now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to take a break and shut that up. Sorry about that. Was that obnoxious to you? Could you hear that? Was that getting?
It wasn't that loud. No, it was fine.
Oh, okay. Okay. Gosh.
I just had to shut my phone off completely because it
Well,
started.
that's not my phone, it's my computer, and I don't know how to shut that particular notification off. That's my wife texting me. Maybe she could sense I was talking about her. Okay, well, if it's not bothering you, then Jesus. Okay, let's just move on. I don't know how to turn that off just yet, that specific notification. Okay, so we're going to start the recording back now. You can edit this out. This is just a visual cue. Okay. So Marie, I wanted to hear your story. You had a client recently who bought something with the intention of using it as a rental and moving up. Will, I believe his name is.
Right. So Will and I started working. He wanted to buy a house, and he couldn't really afford a house. This is his first thing. He had a limited amount of down payment. And so we bought what he could afford. He bought a condo, but he's a woodworker and he didn't want to bother his neighbors and stuff like that. So we got him a beautiful condo. It was a little bit of a stretch for him financially, but we got him all through it and got him closed. And now it is 2 years later. January was 2 years. And I did a study for him, looking at the comps and looking at doing a market analysis and letting him know with his equity growth and inflation and all of those components we've talked about, he has $90,000 of equity in that property. So he can take that $90,000 out and have a down payment for the house he wants to get. And now he's a little more stable. It's been 2 years, but $90,000 of equity, he's going to turn that around. And by the way, rents are now above his full mortgage payment. So mortgage, interest, taxes, everything is in his payment, and he can get just a little bit more. So he's going to have a couple $100 more cash flow because rents continue to go up, just like you said in the very first slide. So he's now 2 years into it, able to buy his second property. The guy's 30 years old.
Yeah, the analogy
He's
that I
already
think
building
of,
his wealth.
I love that. I mean, I heard an analogy from somebody that I love, and she told me, this is back to the principle of the best way to get the house that you want is to get the house you can afford, and then use that to springboard into the house that you want, because it's a lot shorter of a path that way than trying to save your way to a down payment of the house that you want that's probably more expensive, because it's appreciating all that whole time while you're doing that, and you're throwing a bunch of money away to rent at the same time. And the analogy that she said is, it's like you're chasing a train. If you want to get on near the front of the train, you don't run alongside of the train until you're next to the car you want to get on. You just get on at the caboose, because once you're on the train itself, all that momentum is carrying you forward with it. And then you can walk to the front of the train, or you can keep the same amount of energy and run to the front of the train, but you're making a lot more progress because the train underneath you is doing all that motion for you. So, I mean, we come across that a lot where people want to live in their dream home right away. And there's nothing wrong with that. I want them to live in their dream home too. But the fastest way to get there is to get in the game, start building some equity, and use that to get into the house that you want.
And we're going to talk about this a little further in, houses are not cheap here. And so how do you get started on this? You get the house that you can afford, and then everything else really starts to accelerate.
That's exactly right. It's the easiest way to do it and the fastest way to do it. One thing we'll throw up there too is this concern about rates, because rates, a year ago were in the 3s, and now they're in the 6s and sometimes 7s, depending on how much you're putting down and your credit and stuff like that. But what I think is interesting is that rates went below 5% for the first time ever. And it touched below in 2009 and then went below in 2010 and stayed below to try to come out of that recession that was caused by real estate in general. I wouldn't say it was caused by real estate. It was caused by people on Wall Street selling loans for something other than they were. That's another story. But when I think about rates and what, we think about what they're going to do and how do we play that game properly, there's a couple things I like to point out. One is if we wait for rates to go down, the market is going to flood with more buyers. And it's going to cause for two reasons, it's going to cause the price of the house to go up because you have more buyers. But also, people think in terms of what they can afford monthly. And if rates go down, they can spend more on a house, and that will drive the prices of houses up also. But I also think of it in just like this idea that will always be true, which is that whatever rates are today, they can only do one of two things. So it kind of, I'm not going to say that it doesn't matter, because it does matter, but there's no actionable information. There's nothing that we can do based on what rates are today. We wanted the lowest rate possible, but at the end of the day, it's not worth waiting for, because rates can only do two things. If rates go up, so let's say you get a 7% rate today, and in a year, rates are 9%. How are you going to feel about that? Right? If rates are 9% in a year and you got a 7% rate today, you're going to be glad you got what you got, because you got a 7% and people are buying homes at 9%, because people will still be buying homes because people need real estate. People need to live in it. So if rates go down, if the opposite thing happens, let's say you get a 7% rate and a year from now, rates are 5%. Are you going to be like, oh no, I've got this 7% rate, and if I waited, I could have gotten 5 instead? That's not going to happen, because you simply refinance. And if real estate is new to you, all refinancing means is you just restructure the debt. You replace a 7% loan with a 5% loan, and you carry on. And you can either shorten the duration and keep the same payment, or you can keep the same duration and lower your payment. So all of which are good things, or some combination of those things. You can always refinance if rates go down, restructure the debt on the property and have a lower rate, all the while your home was appreciating, especially because rates went down and people are, there's more buyers looking for homes. So you've got some appreciation there. The bottom line on this is whatever rates are today, if they go up, great, you got in a lower rate. If they go down, great, refinance. It's like there's no sense in waiting for rates to do something that we don't even know they're going to do anyway, because either way, there's a solution. If they go up, you're glad you got what you got. If they go down, you refinance and restructure the whole thing.
Yeah, I think about, when I bought my first house, rates were at 12%, and I bought the house. Granted, houses were quite a bit less expensive when I bought my first house, but I ended up restructuring the rate when the rates went down. So you get in when you can get in and make changes when you need to. Nothing is static.
Yeah. So you mentioned a little bit like, what does it take to get in? And I'm using an example of a $500,000 home. You can obviously do something less than that, or you could do more, but that's just a simple round number that we can do math on. And we're in the Denver metro area, Boulder area, where $500,000, I wouldn't say that's a starter home or the lowest price, but it's on the lower end of a single family residence like this. But if you're sometimes people think that you're going to need, for that kind of down payment, or for that kind of home, you're going to need $100,000, 20%. People still are stuck on this 20% mindset, but that's not true at all. You can get into that home for $15,000 down if you're a first-time home buyer. It just requires 3%. If you're a veteran, by the way, I like to throw this out. I know that the majority, or it's a minority of people that are veterans, but if you are, that is one of the greatest financial benefits that they provide veterans, is there's a special loan that they qualify for that requires nothing down. And then if you use an FHA loan, you need 3.5%, which is $17,500 for a $500,000 home. People use FHA loans if they've got like a bankruptcy in their past or a foreclosure or something. The FHA is more lenient on those kind of things in your credit history, but it's not a lot more. You can still get into a nice home for very little down. So those are the down payment minimums. And then for like, sometimes that's a hurdle for people. They don't have the money. So there's a couple of solutions to that. One, if you have family or friends that can lend you the money, or gift the money, we see a lot of parents doing that to help their kids get into their first homes. That's clean and easy. But there's other solutions as well. One is you can borrow from your 401k. That's an interest-free solution to getting money for a down payment. We see that all the time. It's a great way to use assets you've saved for the future to give you some impact now, to save money on your living expenses over time and to start building equity. There's some huge power in that. I wouldn't say this is a solution for a down payment, but if you borrow money from like a family member or a friend, remember that you pay rent in advance, but you pay mortgages in arrears. So it's early March right now. If I'd have purchased a home in early March, I wouldn't have a payment until May. So I have 2 months that I don't have that expense. Plus I'd get my security deposit back, assuming I didn't trash the house I was renting. So there's, if the security deposit was near about a month's rent, that's about 3 months rent that isn't coming out of your budget that you could use that's going to be an influx into your budget that you could use to pay somebody back if you needed to borrow money for the home. So there's lots of creative solutions, and there are others as well. That's not an exhaustive list of solutions, but there's creative ways to come up with the money for a down payment so that you can get off that track of renting, get on the track of home ownership and start building the equity, get on a flatter trajectory, easy for me to say, on that expense and move forward with that.
And there's also, for first-time buyers, there's also down payment assistance programs.
Yep.
There's lots of things that lenders are trying to do to help people get in. And there's also, we don't see it quite as much this season yet, but some of the sellers are offering huge concessions, like $10,000 toward buying your rate down so that you can make it affordable to get in. So things are changing all the time, and things are being offered to help people get into home ownership.
Yeah.
So
and the
process,
next
thing, go ahead.
Sorry, sometimes the thing that intimidates people is the process. I think when I was 20 years old, I didn't think about owning real estate. I thought my parents owned real estate, not me. And then I woke up and I was like, oh, I'm an adult. I should start making adult decisions. And then we came up with a word for that, adulting, right? But sometimes people think the process is complicated, and it just isn't.
Well, especially if you're working with the right people. You've got to get people on the financial side and on the real estate side who know what they're talking about. So get yourself a good team that can lead you through and guide you through and watch it all the way so that you don't make mistakes. I think I run into a lot of my first-time buyers who think they have to know so much more. And the first thing I say is, there's no stupid question, and I have to always assume that you don't know anything. So if I've missed something, ask me questions, because I'm here to educate and get you through the process so that you can start building your wealth, building your investment profile.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's not just the process of getting it, but the process of ownership, or that intimidates some people. But 11 months out of 12, renting and owning are very much the same. You spend some money and you live there for 30 days. Then you have a payment due again. In some cases that's going to your landlord and you're buying your landlord a home, or it's going to the mortgage and you're buying yourself a home, one or the other. But either way, you're spending some money and then you live there. And then every once in a while, somebody, there's a leak under the sink or something. And then you call Marie and say, something's dripping under my sink. What do I do? If you're good with your hands, you can fix that. But Marie says, okay, I'm going to help you get a plumber. Let's get that taken care of. And that might happen, once every year or two, where you have to do something for the property, but there's lots of resources and that's pretty easy. And I'm including the cost of those things in my graphs I was showing earlier. I'm including a cost for maintenance and repairs occasionally as a certain percentage of the value of the home. So that's the cost of those things is included in the graphs that I was showing. So you don't have to think, what would that be on top of that? I've accounted for that in the graphs that I build out.
So let's wrap this up. What's the next step? What the heck do they do now? Right? So I don't want to make this sound excessively simple, but really we need to see what you can afford. We need to go find houses for you. You need to pick the one you want. And you don't always get your first choice. We got to get through that process. And sometimes it takes a little time. Sometimes you need to look for a while, but it's really simple when you're working with the right people. So the next step, your call to action, our numbers are up here. You want to first get in touch with me, you can text me, you can call me, you can email me, whatever is the most simple for you. We need to get on the phone and we need to talk through your particular scenario, whether you are ready today or you're just starting to think about it and you know nothing and you just want to be educated and maybe you're going to buy in 2 or 3 years. It doesn't matter. We'll be here for you. So get the conversation started today to find out how you need to look forward into your future. Right, Brady?
I couldn't agree more.
Okay, so give us a call.
Thanks, Marie.
Thanks for being here. Thank you,
Thanks,
Brady.
everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.